Welcome to Ninja Homeschoolers, where we are together discovering our inner Yoda. And not yoga, Yoda. For all you Star Wars fans out there, I know you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm Jill Wolf, creative learning coach, and I help homeschooling parents to spark creativity and customize learning experiences to challenge and support their children. And I'm excited to be here with you tonight. A little later than normal, but hey, most of you are watching it on a rewatch anyway, right? Okay, tonight we are doing socialization number 2. In a previous Facebook Live, I did socialization number 1, where we took a look at the misconceptions of socialization, specifically that socialization is not taught in schools, in the traditional school. Number 2, that the playground is not the place to learn good social behavior. And number 3, that you do not owe anybody an explanation for how you are doing socialization with your child as a homeschool parent. And specifically, I was aiming at the fact that we get asked all the time, but what about socializing your child? What about socialization? What about social skills? Homeschooling, and we just look, really? That's the biggest argument, but it is. So that's what the first Facebook Live was about. This one, we are going to, hold on one second, got to address that one there. Today, what we're going to address is what is socialization and how is it learned? If it is something that's easily done through homeschooling, then let's take a look at what it is, especially if now that we're responsible for it. So while most of us felt like anxious and a bit defensive when we're first asked, I'd like to suggest we should feel offended. And I know you're like, what, offended? Yes, offended. And I'm going to come back to exactly why in a second. So here's what I want to say first. What is socialization? And I am looking at some notes, so I apologize if I look like I'm looking away from the camera, but I have a lot of things I want to make sure I get in my time today, and so I'm going to use my notes. Anyway, so let's take a look. What is socialization? So at first, many people say, well, coffee with my pals, playing on the playground, group projects, a dinner party, Christmas Eve with my family. That's socialization, But I'm going to say this. Those are places where good social behavior has the chance to be practiced. But those aren't social behaviors themselves. So then, well, what happens in these places that is good social behavior? What is socialization if it's not the place? It's the behavior. So let's talk about what are some of the behaviors, what is happening in those places that is good social behavior. There's greeting others. There's engaging in conversation. There's being able to agree and disagree with others without becoming frustrated or heated. There's sharing, especially little ones. Can you share? Can you take turns? There's being kind when others say things that aren't kind. So your response when someone else's response isn't great social behavior. Can we own our mistakes and apologize if we've hurt someone? That's good social behavior. Do we ask questions instead of talking the whole time? Have you ever been somewhere and someone just talked for 30 minutes and you're like, okay, that was a monologue, not a discussion. Walking away when you're angry instead of striking out. Giving grandma a hug, even if she smells funny because it's kind. Being generous without allowing people to take advantage of you. These are all social behaviors, good social behaviors. And these happen in these socialization places. Okay, so if these are good social behaviors, then the essence of socialization is being able to do these behaviors. Well, how then are they learned? If these are the good behaviors, how are they learned? Hold on to your seat, because it's by watching you. I know that sounds really, really scary, but let me say it again. By watching you. Their social behaviors are learned by watching you. And yes, that is very sobering to think that Well, if my child's acting like this, where did they learn it? They learned it by watching you. So where was that demonstrated? So that's kind of scary. 100% of the time, they are learning how to behave by watching you. So let's jump back to the offended feeling I said before, and we put a pin in it. Why would I feel offended? Because when people bring up and say this, they're either saying, you behave so socially inappropriate that your children are going to be socially inappropriate, which is insulting, or they're saying you're so oblivious to the need to practice good social behavior and am not going to give them an opportunity to do so. Both of those are insulting. Now, mind you, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what somebody else says or asks or probes about why we're homeschooling, especially if they aren't really sincere about wanting to understand. They're more just trying to, just kind of shocked that you do it or want to do it. But in this case, socialization is this at its core. It's good social behavior that is learned by watching the parents. Parents. That means that even if your kids or your friend's kids, your friend who's asking you about this, her kids that are in the public schools or a private school, they're not learning socialization at school. They're learning it from the parents. So this puts all the responsibility back on us. Well, as homeschoolers, we've already decided we want all the responsibility. So great. So now we say, okay, well, let's dig into what this means then for it to be 100% my responsibility. So we've said this is what socialization is. How is it learned? How is it learned? It's watched, it's observed, and it's picked up by watching and observing us. So then what does this mean? Well, for like greeting others, they watch when you walk into a room. And for this person, you shook their hand, and that person you gave a hug, and that person you leaned over and gave a kiss on the cheek. Okay, so those are the kinds of greeting behaviors. You could shake a hand. Oh, I saw you gave that person a high five. Okay, so, and those are easy to observe and mimic, and not really the ones that we're so worried about. But what about the one walking away when you're angry instead of striking out? How many of you do that really, really well? Or have you failed at it? I have, my goodness. I get frustrated, and sometimes I just don't have a rein on my tongue or on my emotion, and I explode. So does my husband. So we both look at each other and go, how are we possibly going to teach our son to walk away when angry instead of striking out? Well, that's something that the two of us are working on. So I'm going to say there's two ways that we can address social behavior that we as parents are struggling with. First of all, there's what I call the preemptive strike or intentional practice. And that I'm actually going to do a whole Facebook Live on next week. So just to get you excited about it, we're going to actually talk about what does it mean to plan or to practice intentionally with your child social behaviors, especially the ones that we aren't great at. But the second one is to model the socially appropriate response to bad social behavior. So let's say I get upset with my husband and I yell something at him, or I just say, what? And my anger takes over instead of me walking away. I now have a chance to model for my child what it means to come back, to own my mistake, to own that my anger lashed out and hurt somebody. And I can apologize. I can apologize to my husband. I can even apologize to my child that they had to kind of be in the room when all of that was going on, or they had to observe mommy being like that. That, you know, mommy's very sorry. I lost it. That doesn't make it okay. I'm here to say I'm sorry and I love you and I made a mistake. We now then get to swallow our pride. Pride is usually what keeps us from doing this. But if we can own our mistakes with our own social behavior inadequacies and mistakes, then we get to model a whole nother level of social behavior to our child. And the truth is that both are important. So as parents, are we going to make mistakes? We do. And so realizing those and then owning them out loud to the people we hurt, and especially to our children, so they see that it's never okay to do that, and that you have to accept responsibility for whose feelings you hurt or for whatever you did and whatever consequence comes with that, but that you can be sorry. That's more good social behavior. So socialization is good social behavior, and it's practicing it. And we get a chance as parents to model it because they're watching us 100% of the time. A good friend of mine used to say that children magnify and reveal the best and worst of what you are as a parent. That means the very best of what I am as a parent. I am loving, I'm kind, I'm tender, I'm creative, I'm fun. I can be spontaneous. I can also be very intentional and well-planned. All those things are the great part, but there's also this other part. And that other part is going to be observed and learned by my child as well. And so what is my responsibility, and how am I going to be intentional with addressing that with my child so that the social behavior they learn is what I really want them to learn? And then how do we set up practice? Practice is next week. That's what we're going to talk about. So here is my challenge to you. Number one, I want you to write down the social behaviors that you want to teach your children. And I encourage you, do this little exercise with your spouse. Maybe when you're doing the dishes together or you're driving in the car, just a list of however many of what are the social behaviors that you really want to teach your child. And it may be just this year. So depending on the age of your child or your children, maybe something's begun to emerge in your home and you're like, I want to address this, but I want you to make a list of the behaviors that you really want to teach your child. And then I want you to think about, so number one, make your list. Number two, I want you to think about how and where are they observing this with you and your spouse. Because the more aware we are of where they're potentially observing this, the better chance we have of actually making good choices ourselves as models, right? Okay. And then number three, I want you to come into the group and I want you to share your list. And because I know there's things that I don't have on there that as I read yours, I'm like, oh, that's a really important one. I want to make sure mine's on there. That's on my list. And then with permission, what I'm going to do is once a month over the next year, I want to make addressing intentionally teaching social behavior, good social behavior, something that we're going to discuss once a month. And so I'm going to take some of the ones that you guys have on your list. We'll do a poll for which one you want to address when. And we're going to talk about, well, what does it mean to model this? And where are you modeling this? And where are you practicing it? Where are you intentionally setting up practice? Which, again, we'll address more deeply next week. But I think this can be a topic in this group that we can together come and help each other discover what good social behaviors do we want to encourage. Are we even aware what these are, so that we know the behaviors that they are learning, and when and where we're practicing these. I think that at the crux of those who ask, what about socialization? Those that are just asking to be shocked by you or to, feel like they're throwing against your bus, let's set them aside. But those people that are really sincerely asking of this, what they're saying is, how are you going to intentionally teach and practice good social skills with your kids? And I don't think we owe them an explanation, but we owe us one, and we owe our children one. How are we going to teach these skills, and how are we going to allow them to practice them? So, again, 3 challenges. Number one, I want you to have a quick conversation with your spouse. I say quick, but this could go into a much deeper and longer conversation. It's up to you and your time, but have a conversation. What social skills do we want to teach our children? 2, I want you to consider, where would they observe those behaviors with us? And number 3, I want you to come share that in the group for the benefit of the group, and so that we can talk about them and have some more Facebook Lives about this. Yeah, so I'm excited about this topic. I think that you know, on a surface level, a lot of people go, oh, but, you know, the social skills of like being able to go to a dance or talk to a boy. And I go, yeah, you know what? That's dating behavior. And that's boy-girl behavior. And I'm not as concerned about those at the younger ages. Now, certainly if you have teens, then those are some of the things that are going to be on your list. How should boys treat girls? How should girls treat boys? All of those things may come under your list of good social behavior. But I also want you to get at the crux of any kind of interaction with people, individually or even in groups, the kinds of behaviors that we really want to teach our children. And I think being very intentional about this is important. So I see I'm only at 16 minutes. I don't have any questions popping up yet. Feel free to write them in, and I would love to come back and answer those at certainly in the feed later tonight, tomorrow, as you watch this. Plug in your questions, and I look forward to continuing this discussion. As for the rest of what I have to say tonight, I'm actually done a little bit early. So I hope you guys have a fabulous evening. If you're not watching this until tomorrow, then you have a great weekend, okay? And remember this, Jill says you can do it. Bye-bye.